I used to think that life's biggest lessons would arrive like thunder, loud, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. But sometimes the moments that change us forever are as quiet as the whisper of a candle on a birthday cake. My name is Elise Turner. If you'd asked anyone at my 30th birthday party, they'd tell you I was the lucky one, two loving parents, a close-knit family, a future full of promise. That night, as laughter echoed through my parents' living room and my mother placed a cake my favorite lemon chiffon on the table, I almost believed it myself. Almost. We grow up believing that family is a circle of safety, a net that catches us when the world gets rough. But what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who teach you how to fall? On that birthday, I learned the difference between being loved and being chosen. The room was filled with smiling faces, a handful of friends and relatives who'd watched me grow up. But nothing could prepare me for the moment my mother stood up beaming and handed a small silver key not to me, but to my older sister Brittany. For Brittany, she said her voice sweet as frosting so she can start her new married life with everything she deserves. The applause was polite, even enthusiastic. My own hand stayed folded in my lap, cold and still. I remember glancing at my father, searching for a sign that maybe this was a misunderstanding, a joke, anything but what it truly was, a public reminder that in my own family, I would always be second best. Maybe you felt it too, the invisible line that divides almost enough from never quite there. Maybe you've watched someone else receive the reward you worked for or listened, as your efforts were praised only when attached to someone else's success. I've spent most of my life trying to earn a seat at the table, not realizing that the table itself could be pulled out from under me. On that day, I learned that sometimes being left out is the first step to stepping up. I didn't say anything, not then, not as my mother hugged Brittany, not as my father squeezed my shoulder with that same practiced sympathy he reserved for scraped knees and broken toys. Inside, though, something shifted. The ache of being overlooked slowly twisted into something sharper, quieter, and far more powerful. This isn't just a story about losing an apartment or even losing trust. It's about what happens when you decide that your story doesn't end in someone else's shadow. If you've ever wondered what it's like to start over, to redefine what family means, or to reclaim your place in a world that seems determined to put you last, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because the truth is, the moments that break us can also become the moments that build us if we let them. Before we go any further, I want you to imagine your own birthday moment, the one that changed how you see the people closest to you. And as you listen to my story, I hope you'll find a piece of your own. Because this isn't just about me, it's about anyone who's ever had to choose between belonging and becoming. Let's begin. They say success is what happens when nobody's watching. But I learned the hard way that sometimes nobody is watching even when they should be. After my birthday, I replayed every decision that led me here. Every extra shift, every skipped vacation, every night spent hunched over my laptop in a coffee shop long after closing time. My parents would smile when I stopped by for Sunday dinners, but they never asked about the late nights or the tired circles under my eyes. If I mentioned work, the conversation drifted back to Brittany and her wedding, or to my father's golf scores, or to the latest family gossip. My sacrifices, renting a tiny room, forgoing new clothes, saying no to dinners out, weren't dramatic. They were just invisible. One evening stands out in my mind. I'd been invited to a colleague's farewell party, but chose instead to deliver groceries for extra cash. As I climbed the stairs of a rundown apartment building with heavy bags in each hand, I remember thinking, no one will ever see this. No one will ever know. But deep down, I wasn't working for applause. I was building something steady, something I hoped would one day be mine. Looking back, I realized how many people in this country, immigrants, dreamers, kids with big hopes, grind through the shadows so their families can shine. We celebrate the success, but rarely honor the cost. It took years for me to understand that love and attention aren't always tied to hard work. Sometimes families overlook the quiet strivers because their victories don't come with fanfare. I used to believe that if I kept proving myself eventually, I would be chosen, noticed, celebrated. The truth is, recognition isn't guaranteed, no matter how much you give up along the way. The real lesson: don't let your worth be measured by anyone else's awareness. Your sacrifices matter even if the world looks away. Of course, I didn't see it that way at the time. I only knew that I was tired of being the one who made things possible in silence, tired of believing that one day it would be my turn. But life has a way of sharpening you with every quiet disappointment. and as winter turned to spring, I felt a new resolve growing inside me. I was ready not for their approval, but for my own beginning. And that, as it turned out, would change everything. Looking back, the signs were always there, quietly shaping the way I saw myself and my place in the family. Favoritism is rarely loud. It creeps in softly, woven into the smallest of moments, a word of praise here, a missed celebration there. My older sister Brittany had always been the golden child. When she scored a B on her math test, my mother baked her a cake. When I brought home straight A's, my father would pat me on the head and say, "That's great, Elise. You've always been responsible." The celebrations were louder, the stories told longer when Brittany was the center. I became good at fading into the background, collecting my little wins, quietly, never wanting to seem jealous or petty. Once during high school, I spent months preparing for a statewide debate competition. I placed second, an achievement that felt huge to me. My parents congratulated me, of course, but the conversation at dinner quickly shifted to Brittany's latest dance recital, complete with videos and enthusiastic applause. That night, I lay awake in bed replaying the look of pride on my parents' faces, pride that it seemed shone just a little brighter for her. I told myself it was normal, that every family had favorites and that my turn would come if I kept working, kept being good. It's a common story, especially in families where expectations run high. The middle child, the quiet achiever, the sibling whose dreams get tucked behind someone else's spotlight. I've since learned that many people, maybe even you, have spent years wondering if anyone truly sees them. The truth is, this kind of invisible competition can shape a person, sometimes making you stronger, other times making you shrink. The lesson I carry with me now is this: your worth isn't a reflection in someone else's mirror. And the shadows we grow up in can sometimes become the shelter where we build our strength. Still, I held on to hope that things might change, that if I achieved enough, my family would finally see me the way I longed to be seen. But patterns once set are hard to break. And sometimes it takes a single painful moment to show us that waiting for someone else's approval is a race we're never meant to win. That realization would set the stage for what happened next on the night everything changed. I think everyone remembers the moment when their heart first breaks, for reasons bigger than love. For me, it was standing in the middle of a crowded living room on my 30th birthday, surrounded by the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. If you had glanced at the scene from across the room, you might have seen nothing amiss. A family gathered, a cake waiting to be sliced, a pile of neatly wrapped gifts. But just beneath the surface, something sharp was twisting. I balanced my own store-bought cake in both hands, careful not to let the plastic container slip, feeling a quiet ache settle deep in my chest. The moment felt endless as my mother cleared her throat, the subtle signal that she had something important to say. The whole room seemed to lean forward, expectant and smiling, as if everyone already knew the script except for me. "Elise, honey, I know this is your special day, but we have an announcement," she began, voice sweet as spun sugar. For a flicker of a second, I let myself hope maybe she'd remembered my recent promotion. Maybe this was the moment she'd say how proud she was of me. But instead, she turned to Brittany, pressed a small silver key into her hand, and declared, "This is for Brittany and her fiancé, their new apartment, a real fresh start." The applause that followed felt deafening. I smiled because it was the only thing I could do. Even the friends I'd invited, their faces pink with secondhand embarrassment, could barely meet my eyes. My father gave me his usual shoulder squeeze, that practiced gesture meant to be comforting, but which now felt like a closing door. I looked around the room at my family, people who'd known me my whole life, and wondered when I'd become a background character in my own story. In that moment, something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. What hurt most wasn't the apartment or even the key, but the ease with which my efforts had been dismissed. I'd spent years saving for that place. Years of cutting corners, skipping pleasures, building something I believed would be my first true foothold in the world. And yet in one easy gesture, my family had decided it belonged to someone else. I thought about all the birthdays before the ones where I let Brittany blow out my candles, the times I quietly stepped aside because it was her turn. This, I realized, wasn't about one bad day. It was about a pattern, a silent expectation that I would always give way. It's funny how family celebrations can sometimes feel lonelier than being truly alone. I wandered into the kitchen to refill my drink, grateful for the hum of the refrigerator, to drown out the laughter. I thought about a colleague, Marcus, who once told me how his parents used his college fund to bail out his older brother's failed business. You can't compete with the golden child, he'd joked, but I'd seen the tired smile behind his words. Stories like his are everywhere. Quiet sacrifices, invisible pain, and families that love imperfectly, even when they mean well. In that kitchen, I realized I wasn't unique. But I was done pretending it didn't matter. When I returned to the party, I found Brittany surrounded by friends showing off her new key, her future shining a little brighter with every retelling of the big surprise. I caught snippets of their conversation, wedding plans, paint colors, talk of a fresh start. I wondered if she'd ever stop to ask whose start it really was. As I stood in the doorway, someone handed me a plate of cake, and for a second, I thought about refusing it, about making a scene finally demanding to be seen. But I didn't. I just smiled, took the plate, and wished Brittany the best. Because sometimes grace is all you have left. But grace can also be a turning point. That night, as the last guests drifted home and the laughter faded, I stayed behind to help my mother wash dishes. The conversation was quiet, mundane things about errands, groceries, nothing about the apartment or the way I must have looked when the key changed hands. When I finally left, my mother hugged me quick and distracted, already making a mental checklist for Brittany's move. I walked home in the dark, the city lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. In the silence of my own small apartment, I sat on the floor and let myself feel everything: anger, sadness, relief. That moment alone became the beginning of something new. I realized I'd spent so much time waiting to be chosen to be celebrated that I'd forgotten how to choose myself. Sometimes standing alone in a full room is the truest kind of wake-up call. It tells you where you stand, but more importantly, it points to where you could go if you stopped asking for permission. For the first time, I let myself imagine a life where I stopped shrinking to fit into someone else's story. The next day, I woke up early and made a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of everything I still had: my skills, my grit, my dreams that refused to fade. I reached out to a mentor I admired, someone who'd once told me, when the people around you can't see your value, it's time to build a new table. We met for coffee that week, and I told her everything, not just about the apartment, but about a lifetime of feeling unseen. She listened, nodding, and then asked me a simple question: if you stopped waiting for their approval, what would you do next? The answer came slowly. Then all at once, I'd invest in myself. If you've ever been the one left holding the empty plate, if you've watched your dreams handed to someone else with a smile, I hope you hear this. You don't have to stay at a table that doesn't serve you. You are allowed to want more, to want fairness, to want to be truly seen. That's not selfish, it's survival. And sometimes it's the very thing that sparks the biggest changes of your life. So I started again. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. I let myself dream bigger than I'd ever dared, about work, about home, about the kind of family I wanted to build for myself one day. I poured my energy into projects that excited me, volunteered for challenges no one else wanted, and slowly, quietly began to rebuild my confidence. Every small win was mine alone. Every step forward, a reminder that I was more than the sum of my disappointments. The breaking point isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the moment when you finally see the truth clearly enough to change your life. Standing alone in that crowded room hurt more than I can say. But it also forced me to look inward, to ask myself what I really valued, and to promise that from now on, I would never let anyone else decide my worth. The hardest part was letting go of the hope that my family would change. But as I learned, letting go can make space for something better, a life defined not by what you're given, but by what you choose to claim. And so the stage was set. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to shift. My quiet determination was just the beginning. Sometimes the greatest transformations start in the smallest, most painful moments. I was finally ready to stop waiting and to start building a new future, one choice at a time. Sacrifice often doesn't look like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no rain-soaked scenes where someone watches the love of their life drive away. In real life, sacrifice is smaller, quieter, and far more persistent. It's the decision to walk instead of taking a cab so you can save $5. It's skipping a Friday night out again to make sure your bills are paid. I became an expert in the little sacrifices, the kind nobody noticed, because I never talked about them. That was my armor. If I kept my struggles private, maybe no one would see how much it all cost me. My days blurred together with work. My mornings started before sunrise, a mug of coffee cupped between my hands as I replied to client emails or finished up freelance coding assignments. My evenings stretched late into the night, hunched over spreadsheets or drafting proposals, the glow of my laptop, the only witness to my determination. I told myself I was building something solid security, a sense of ownership, a foundation no one could take from me. Yet when I returned home, my tiny room felt emptier than ever. The walls were bare except for a corkboard with post-it notes, tiny reminders of every dream I'd put on hold for someday. There was one particular winter that still stands out. The heating in my apartment broke, and the landlord was slow to fix it. I spent 3 weeks bundled in layers, typing with fingerless gloves, watching my breath fog in the air as I worked. I joke about it to friends. It's like living in an old movie, very vintage, but inside I felt the weight of every choice. Meanwhile, Brittany posted photos from a spa retreat, wrapped in fluffy robes, grinning with friends. My mother commented with heart emojis. I scrolled past the pictures, reminding myself that this wasn't a competition, but it stung all the same. I wasn't alone in this kind of sacrifice. I saw it in my friend Lucia, who worked double shifts at the hospital to send money home to her family in Guatemala. I saw it in Mark, a first-generation college graduate who never bought lunch on campus so he could help his younger siblings with their school supplies. Their struggles didn't make the news, but they were the glue holding their families together. I learned that across America, people like us keep the world turning quiet, unseen, often unrewarded. There was an art to hiding the struggle. At family gatherings, I'd smile through stories of my quirky apartment, leaving out the parts where the hot water rarely worked. I accepted hand-me-downs from friends and dressed them up with a scarf or earrings to look vintage chic. When asked about my social life, I'd mention the library book club or the occasional work happy hour, never admitting how isolated I often felt. It's easier, I found, to let people assume you're content than to explain why you're always holding things together with tape and hope. Sometimes, even those closest to us are blind to our sacrifice. My parents loved to joke about my practical streak, telling friends how proud they were that I managed on my own, but pride is different from understanding. I wished sometimes that they would ask how I was really doing, not just about work or my apartment, but about my heart, my fears, my loneliness. I wanted to be seen for more than just my resilience. But vulnerability felt dangerous, so I swallowed it, choosing silence over disappointment. My relationship with Ben, my college boyfriend, quietly unraveled in those years. He wanted to travel to try new restaurants to make memories now, not later. I tried to keep up, but every unexpected expense sent me spiraling into anxiety. After another argument about money, he finally asked, "Why are you always waiting for life to start?" I didn't have an answer then. I just knew I was terrified of risking what little security I had. When we broke up, I told friends it was mutual, but the truth was simpler. I was tired of pretending I could have it all. There were bright spots too, moments when the struggle felt worthwhile. The first time I paid a full month's rent without borrowing or using credit, I celebrated with a cupcake and a solo dance party in my kitchen. The day I reached my savings goal for the apartment down payment, I called my old debate coach from high school, the only adult who had ever said, "Elise, you can do hard things." Her pride in me was the warmth I needed. In those small victories, I found reasons to keep going even when the big picture felt impossible. Sometimes I wondered if I was foolish for holding out hope that my family would eventually notice. I thought about Lucia and Mark and all the people like us. Was it enough to know our sacrifices mattered even if no one else acknowledged them? I decided that yes, it was. But the lesson I came to understand, and one I want to share with you, is this. There's dignity in struggle, but you are allowed to want more. You deserve to be seen not just for what you survive, but for who you are and what you dream. As the months went on, my perspective began to shift. I realized that the things I wanted, belonging, recognition, a place that felt truly mine, weren't selfish. They were basic human needs. I stopped apologizing for wanting a seat at the table, even if it meant building my own. Quietly, I began to invest not only in my work, but in my well-being. I reconnected with old friends, started journaling, and let myself imagine a future where sacrifice was a choice, not a sentence. That shift in mindset was subtle but powerful. It didn't change my circumstances overnight, but it changed how I saw myself. I stopped seeing sacrifice as a badge of honor and started seeing it as a tool, one that I could choose to pick up or put down. I found new energy in my work, a new sense of possibility in every day. Even the small, ordinary moments, sunlight on my desk, laughter with a neighbor in the hallway, a good book at midnight, became sources of joy. The final lesson I carry from those years is this. Sometimes the world won't clap for you, but that doesn't mean your victories aren't real. You can celebrate yourself quietly, proudly, and that can be enough. The greatest changes in our lives often start with a single act of self-recognition the moment we decide that we matter, whether anyone else notices or not. And so quietly, things began to change. My resolve grew, and with it, new doors began to open. I couldn't have predicted the twists that were coming, the challenges, the heartbreak, or the chance to finally reclaim what was rightfully mine. But that's the thing about silent sacrifices given time. They have a way of turning into the loudest triumphs. I was about to learn just how much strength I'd been building and how one day it would all come to light. When change finally arrives, it almost never looks the way you imagined. For months after my birthday, I kept my distance, working, saving, and piecing myself back together. I saw my family only when necessary, declining invitations with polite excuses, slowly carving out a life that was mine alone. I'd nearly convinced myself that closure would come quietly without confrontation. But life had other plans, and so did fate. One afternoon, my mother called, her voice bright with excitement. "Elise, we're having a small get-together for Brittany's move. You'll come, won't you?" The apartment was ready, she told me. Everyone would be there. Family, Brittany's friends, even her fiancé's parents. I hesitated, instinctively wary, but something inside urged me not to hide anymore. It was time to reclaim my place in the story, even if only to witness the next chapter. I bought a modest bouquet on my way, palms sweating as I rehearsed small talk in my head. The day was sunny, and the apartment sparkled with the kind of energy that comes from fresh starts. Brittany was radiant, flitting around with keys jangling in her hand, her future laid out in paint samples and Pinterest boards. My parents played the gracious hosts, beaming with pride. The rooms filled with laughter and stories, the smell of new furniture, mingling with cake and champagne. I wandered through the space I'd dreamed of for years, tracing the windows, the view, the echoes of every hope I'd once pinned to these walls. But then, as guests gathered in the living room, my father cleared his throat and gestured for quiet. "We have a little surprise," he announced, turning to me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Elise, you might want to see this." My heart thudded. I took the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside, I found official papers, deed documents, and business records, clearly stamped with my name. I scanned the words, my eyes widening as the truth settled in the apartment, and in fact, the entire building belonged to me. Not to Brittany, not to my parents, but to Elise Turner, sole owner-president of Turner Holdings. The room was silent. Brittany's laughter faded. Her fiancé stared at me, and my mother's smile faltered, confusion rippling across her face. "What does this mean?" Brittany asked, voice barely above a whisper. I stood tall, feeling my shoulders straighten for the first time in months. "It means," I said gently, "that the home you've been given was something I built from the ground up. I bought it. I own it. I let you think it was a gift because I trusted you, but that trust has to be earned." I saw the shift, then shock, giving way to realization, pride melting into something humbler. For the first time, my family saw not the quiet, dependable Elise, but the woman who had turned every sacrifice into success. I thought about all the people who spend years being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. The world is full of them, women, especially whose work is invisible until suddenly it can't be ignored. There's a kind of justice in reclaiming what's yours, but it's not about revenge. It's about truth. It's about letting go of the need to be recognized by others and finding the courage to recognize yourself. In that moment, standing in the center of my own story, I understood the difference. This wasn't about Brittany or my parents or even the apartment. It was about every silent promise I'd ever made to myself and finally keeping it. If you've ever wondered whether the world will notice your hard work, I want you to know sometimes they won't until the day you unveil it for yourself. The lesson I learned is simple. You don't have to announce your worth. You just have to build it. And when the time comes, it will speak for itself. As the afternoon faded, the party lost its shine. People offered awkward congratulations. Brittany hugged me with trembling arms. My parents searched for words that never came. But inside me, there was only peace. I left the gathering quietly, bouquet in hand, the weight of the years lifted from my shoulders. I knew that this was just the beginning of a much deeper reckoning, a truth that would ripple through my family, through all the stories we'd ever told ourselves about who deserved what. But I also knew something else. The most important unveiling had already happened deep within me, in the quiet place where self-worth is born, and that more than any key or deed or title was the real prize. What happened next would test us all in ways we never expected. But for the first time, I was ready. Ready to face secrets, to demand honesty, and to find out whether the bonds of family could withstand the truth. The tables had turned. Now it was time to see who could truly change. Secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight, tucked between the lines of polite conversation, folded into old family stories that nobody questions. For years, I thought the hardest part of my journey would be proving my worth to those who never truly saw me. But I was wrong. The hardest part was learning that even the closest bonds can be knotted with secrets, some meant to protect, others meant to control. After the unveiling, the mood in my family changed. Conversations grew strained, eye contact fleeting the air, thick with questions nobody wanted to voice. My mother called a week later, her tone brittle, asking if I would join them for dinner. There was an urgency I hadn't heard before, a need to explain perhaps, or to reclaim control. I accepted more out of curiosity than hope, feeling like a guest in my own life as I crossed the threshold of my childhood home. We sat around the table, the same one where we'd celebrated birthdays and milestones. Brittany fidgeted with her napkin. My father poured wine he didn't drink. My mother forced a smile that never reached her eyes. They spoke in half sentences, their voices low until finally my father cleared his throat. We thought we were doing what was best. He began glancing at my mother, but perhaps we owe you some answers. I waited, letting the silence stretch, a small act of power, one I'd only recently learned to wield. That night, secrets came tumbling out one after another. My parents explained that after the economic downturn, they'd been forced to make choices they hadn't wanted to admit. They'd moved money between accounts, borrowing from my college fund to help with Brittany's expenses, intending to pay it back when things got better. Brittany confessed that she'd known about the apartment's true ownership for months, but hadn't said anything, too afraid to lose her parents' approval. The air was heavy with regret, words tripping over each other, apologies tangled with justifications. Listening to them, I felt a strange mix of anger and empathy. I could see how fear and pride had shaped every decision, how easy it was for love to become confused with control. It's a story I've heard before, from friends and strangers alike, families who keep secrets to spare feelings, who make compromises that grow into resentments. In America, we're taught to value independence, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But inside so many homes, dependence and obligation still pull invisible strings. I shared my own truth too, how it felt to work for years in silence, to watch my efforts given away, to be told that love and fairness were the same thing. I told them about Lucia and Mark, about the sacrifices people make hoping for recognition, that sometimes never comes. For the first time, my family listened, really listened, without interruption or deflection. The room was thick with vulnerability, a rare, honest moment I had craved for years. There was no magic fix, no sudden warmth. My parents apologized, awkwardly and imperfectly. Brittany cried, shoulders shaking, the weight of secrets lifted at last. I forgave them, not because the hurt was gone, but because I needed to let it go for myself. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to carry the poison forward. That was my small act of grace, a gift as much for me as for them. In the days that followed, the family dynamic shifted. We started having honest conversations about money, about boundaries, about what it meant to truly respect one another. My parents began including me in decisions they'd once made behind closed doors. Brittany, humbled, reached out to reconnect, determined to earn back trust she'd lost. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard. But with each uncomfortable talk, each step toward transparency, something new began to grow in the empty spaces secrets had left behind. One evening, Brittany and I walked together through the neighborhood where we'd grown up. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with gold. She told me about her fears, how she'd always felt like she had to be perfect to keep everyone happy at any cost. I was so afraid of losing Mom and Dad's love, she said, voice trembling, that I didn't notice I was losing you. In that moment, I realized how much pain we'd both carried, how comparison and competition had kept us apart, when we could have been allies. That's the thing about secrets, they isolate us even from the people we love most. We hide our shame, our disappointments, our fears, believing we're protecting ourselves or others. But the real protection comes from truth, from daring to be honest even when it hurts. That night, as Brittany and I sat beneath a street lamp, I promised her that things would be different. No more secrets, I said, and for the first time, I meant it. If you've ever discovered a hidden truth in your own family, you know how disorienting it can be. You question everything, your memories, your loyalties, your sense of self. But I learned something important through it all. Secrets lose their power when they're spoken aloud. Honesty doesn't erase the past, but it makes a better future possible. My family wasn't healed overnight, but with every truth told, we took one step closer to real connection. As the season changed and the world outside began to thaw, I found myself feeling lighter, more hopeful. My relationship with my parents and Brittany was still fragile, but we were learning to see each other as we truly were, not perfect, not broken, just human. That I realized was enough. Yet there was still more to uncover, more history to confront, old wounds and old debts that needed attention before any of us could really move on. The journey of truth is never linear, and every family has its chapters still waiting to be written. I was ready to face them whatever came next, knowing that honesty would be my compass and grace my guide. There are moments in life when you think you finally understand the story of your family, only to realize you've only read a few chapters. After the night of confessions, things settled, but a quiet curiosity remained in me. We had exposed the personal wounds, but the practical ones, old promises, tangled money. The invisible lines of inheritance still lingered in the air. For years, there had been whispers about a trust fund my grandmother left behind, a nest egg meant for education and new beginnings. My parents had always told me it was used up long ago, a casualty of hard times. I wanted to believe them, but something didn't sit right, and for the first time, I had the courage to look deeper. One rainy afternoon, I sat with stacks of old documents at my kitchen table. I found faded bank statements, letters with my grandmother's looping handwriting, and files that hadn't been touched in years. As I combed through the paperwork, a picture slowly emerged. Transfers between accounts, withdrawals that didn't match the stories I'd been told, records of a family vacation taken during the very semester I'd scrambled for scholarships and side gigs. The truth was clear: the trust fund had never truly disappeared. It had simply been redirected, spent not on my future, but on comforts and appearances my parents couldn't let go of. It's a story as old as time, and yet uniquely painful when it happens to you. I remembered Mark, my friend from work, who once confided that his parents cashed out his college savings to cover his brother's rehab, telling him, "Family comes first." I thought about the subtle betrayal, how easy it is to justify choices when you're trying to hold a family together, and how the cost is almost always paid by the one who isn't favored. My heart ached for my grandmother's intent, her quiet hope that her gift would open doors for the next generation, not become a band-aid for past mistakes. Bringing up the trust fund was harder than I expected. My parents were defensive, then embarrassed, then finally apologetic. "We did what we thought was best at the time," my mother said, voice trembling. "We always planned to tell you." I believe that much intentions are rarely evil, just flawed by fear and the need to keep up appearances. Still, their choices had consequences. I explained how I'd struggled, how a single semester's tuition or a safety net might have changed everything for me. We sat in silence, letting the truth settle between us. Sometimes love is doing hard things, like forgiving a mistake that cost you more than money. For Brittany, it was a lesson in humility. She'd always assumed things would be handled for her, that the future was secure because someone else would make it so. As I explained the true story behind the trust, I saw her face change. I never realized, she whispered, "how much you carried alone." For the first time, she asked about my dreams, not as competition, but with real curiosity. We talked late into the night about what legacy really means, not just wealth, but trust and the courage to use what you have for good. There are so many families in America with stories like ours, inheritances meant to lift one person up, but lost in the churn of everyday emergencies and silent agreements. I read about siblings who went to court over family homes, cousins who never spoke again after a will was read, adult children still haunted by the feeling that they were always second best. But I also found hope in stories of those who turned their pain into purpose, who used their experiences to help others protect their own futures, to teach about financial honesty and the value of clear boundaries. The lesson for me was sharp, but freeing. I couldn't change the past or restore the gift my grandmother meant for me, but I could choose what happened next. I began setting clear boundaries around money and responsibility, drawing up agreements even for small family loans, and encouraging Brittany to do the same. We started talking openly about expectations and needs, letting go of the idea that love meant keeping secrets or absorbing every cost in silence. For the first time, I saw the possibility of a new kind of family legacy, one built on honesty, mutual support, and the willingness to speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Reclaiming the legacy wasn't just about money, it was about taking back the right to define what mattered for myself. I reached out to my grandmother's favorite charity and made a donation in her name, a small gesture to honor her original intention. It felt like drawing a new line in the story, one that pointed toward healing not just for me, but for the family I still love despite everything. As the months passed, I felt a quiet peace returning. My parents learned to ask before making decisions that would affect us all. Brittany and I built a tentative new trust grounded in shared experience rather than rivalry, and I found myself finally letting go of old anger, making room for new hope. The wounds weren't gone, but they were healing slowly with every honest conversation. But life has a way of testing even the most fragile truces. As our family found its new rhythm, an unexpected challenge arose, one that would force each of us to decide just how much we were willing to risk for one another. Would we fall back into old patterns or step forward together, changed by everything we had learned? The answer I was about to discover would shape not just our family's legacy, but the future we would all share. There's a moment in every healing journey when you have to decide what you're willing to keep carrying and what you're ready to lay down. After the trust fund revelations and the slow rebuilding that followed, I found myself sitting with a different kind of question. What do we owe each other truly after years of mistakes and unspoken pain? Is forgiveness just a gift we give to others, or is it something we must also offer ourselves? My family had changed, yes, but there were days when old wounds would quietly ache, when a stray comment or forgotten promise made me feel 12 years old again. I'd read stories online of people who cut all ties after family betrayal, estranged daughters, sons, who never returned home, siblings who became strangers. It's more common than we think in America. Boundaries are often confused with abandonment. I understood now why some chose silence, but I also knew my own heart. I didn't want anger to write the rest of my story, but I also didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. So I began to draw boundaries, not as punishment, but as protection. I limited what I shared about my finances and future plans, learning to say no without guilt. When my parents slipped into old habits, overstepping or making decisions for my own good, I gently reminded them of our new agreements. Brittany and I too learned to check in before asking for help, to respect each other's space and hard-won independence. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, but with practice they grew easier. We were learning a new language, one where love and honesty could live side by side. One day, my mother invited me for Sunday lunch, and I hesitated for the first time in my life. It wasn't out of spite, but out of a need for rest. I sent a text instead saying, "I need today for myself, but I love you. Let's talk soon." She replied with a simple heart emoji and no guilt tripping, a small but meaningful sign of growth. In that quiet space, I realized I was finally living my own life, not in rebellion, but in gentle self-respect. That was something worth celebrating. I started sharing more of my story with friends and coworkers, surprised by how many people nodded in understanding. Lucia told me about her decision to move across the country after years of family pressure. Mark said he still loved his parents, but had to love them from a distance to keep his peace. I learned that boundaries don't have to mean shutting people out. Sometimes they're just a way of keeping the door open without letting the past blow through like a storm. The lesson for me was this: silence is not always golden. Sometimes it's heavy, a weight that keeps you stuck in old roles and old pain. Choosing boundaries, loving from a safe distance, speaking your needs, letting yourself rest, is a form of forgiveness too. Not everything needs to be fixed or finished. Some things simply need to be honored and released. In setting those boundaries, I made room for new joys, new relationships, and a sense of belonging that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. As autumn settled in and the trees outside my window turned gold, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For all that had been lost, so much had also been found: truth, trust, and a kind of freedom I'd never known before. My story wasn't perfect, and neither was my family, but for the first time both felt honest and real. I was ready to step into the future, one shaped not by the silence of old hurts, but by the steady, hopeful voice I'd finally claimed as my own. And as the days grew shorter and the nights cooler, I sensed that something new was on the horizon. There were more lessons to come, and perhaps more chances to practice everything I'd learned about courage, kindness, and the delicate art of letting go. Some endings arrive quietly, more like gentle sunsets than grand finales. As another year passed, I saw the shape of my life settle into something unexpected, but steady, a foundation I could finally trust. My family and I were still learning how to speak the truth, still tripping over old habits, but the patterns had changed. No longer did I feel the pressure to fix every misunderstanding or carry every burden. Instead, I made peace with the idea that growth is a slow unfolding, sometimes as simple as a single honest conversation at the kitchen table. In my work, I found new energy and confidence. I volunteered to mentor young women just starting out, sharing stories of invisible work and hard-won boundaries. I saw myself in their questions and quiet hopes, and I encouraged them to define success in ways that honored their own values, not just the expectations of others. Once a mentee told me, "You made me feel like I could finally breathe." Her words reminded me of the power we hold when we share our stories not as warnings, but as invitations to courage. Brittany and I built a different kind of relationship, one shaped by respect instead of rivalry. There were still rough days, moments when old jealousies threatened to surface, but we faced them together. My parents grew gentler, slower to offer advice, quicker to listen. At family gatherings, there was laughter, sometimes tears, but mostly there was a new sense of ease, a freedom to be imperfect and still loved. I realized that the legacy I wanted to leave wasn't about money or possessions, but about a family that learned slowly and imperfectly how to heal. One autumn evening, I walked through my neighborhood watching leaves fall in golden spirals. I thought of all the people I'd met along the way: Lucia Mark, my old debate coach, even the barista who knew my name when no one else seemed to. Each had taught me something about resilience, about letting go, about the quiet bravery of showing up for yourself day after day. The world is full of people building lives in the shadows, waiting for the moment when their own worth comes into the light. My story, I realized, was never really about an apartment or a trust fund or even forgiveness. It was about learning to trust myself, to honor my own boundaries, to love deeply without losing my sense of self. I hope that if you've seen yourself in these words, you'll find the courage to choose your own path, to build a legacy that's true to you. You don't need anyone's permission to begin again or to decide what family means in your life. So, wherever you are, whether you're standing in the middle of your own breaking point or quietly rebuilding from a place of hurt, know this: you are not alone. The journey isn't perfect, and neither are any of us. But every honest step, every boundary drawn with care, every act of gentle courage adds up. One day you'll look back and realize you weren't just surviving, you were writing a story worth living. And as I look toward what's next, I do so with hope. Because endings are also beginnings, and there is always another chapter waiting, one only you can write. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, share your own. Let's keep building legacies of truth, compassion, and quiet strength together.